thank you so much for coming. Thanks, Jason. Thank you for having me as well. I think this is a really exciting topic. I mean, some of you in the room already partners, some of you looking to become partners, some of you here just to gain some more insight, and some of you, like me, here for the free breakfast. So whatever your reason for being in the room, now that you're here, please take the opportunity. We've got an excellent panel coming up. We've got excellent people on the panel, but we've also got some really informed people in the room that can answer questions as well and can give insight if you've got any worries, concerns, or barriers that are currently preventing you from becoming a partner. Because I think in this environment, one of the biggest things is taking the risk, right? And wheelchair rugby is all about risk. Most people, the reason they've made the team is because they took a risk and it maybe didn't pan out the way they wanted it to. And then once you're in the team and in a squad, it's a risky sport. So I'm super, super lucky that I've been involved in parasport for longer than I care to admit. When we were talking about this last week, it worked out it was 30 years. Sarah thankfully said I didn't look old enough. I'll take that. But, and again, way before anybody really knew what the Paralympics was, because there was a lack of exposure and it wasn't on the TV. And if you said, I want to be a Paralympian, people went, oh, that's lovely. And you had to really sort of look at, well, you had to explain what the Paralympics was. And the amount of times you had to say, someone would say, oh, the Olympics. You'd be like, no, the Paralympics. And then explain that they're same, but different, which is what we're looking at today, and helping people understand what equity can be achieved when we get it right. And so for me, like I said, 30 years, when I would say I was blessed to experience it at the right time. Like the Paralympics went from, like I said, no one knowing really what it was, people being amazed that I could swim and not in circles, even though I only used one arm, to actually now being like, well, why do you only go that fast? You know, and actually treating it like the sport it is. And sport is super powerful. And I started off as a little 10-year-old that didn't really know anything about the Paralympics, even though I loved sport and I had a disability. And then I moved into the world of being an athlete, which was incredible, because for me, I think I experienced it exactly the right time, where the movement was growing and people were understanding things. And for the first time ever, when I went to the Paralympic Games, I realized what equity can achieve. When you've got everything that you need to be successful, whatever your difference is, it doesn't really matter, right? Like, because you are just you and you're celebrated for you and you have the opportunity to showcase your skill set, which is really where the power is for this partnership and organizations. Is sometimes we have to think differently. Sometimes we come up against challenges and barriers and we get stuck. But if you're someone that's constantly having to live and problem solve, then actually so often the big problems seem smaller. And actually that's where the power of these partnerships come. That's where the benefit is. So yeah, it's great to be attached to a sport, especially one that's won a gold medal in fairly recent times, but it's about so much more than that. And so for me, and then I moved from that athlete lifestyle, which was pretty amazing, but getting up at 4:30 in the morning every other day was not that good, into the broadcasting sector, and into, like, most recently producing Paris 2024, not by myself, I'd like to point out, but as part of the Channel 4 coverage with Whisper. And so, and again, that just shows the evolution that has happened, because first and foremost, it wasn't on the TV back in 1996, or it was for like 20 minutes every other day. And there is no way they would have taken a risk. They saw it as a risk, maybe, I don't know. Or it would have been perceived as a risk back then to put somebody who had no experience in broadcasting typically into that role. But it was award-winning coverage. And it, like, not just because of me, but like it was award, and we moved the dial so much. And I think that's the power of the Paralympic Games. Like, it's a relatively young movement in that it's only been around since 1948, really. That's when the first Games was in Stoke Mandeville. And like, there's a lot of people that were still born when that happened, you know? And like, to think how far it's come in that time is huge, but it's gaining momentum all the time. And it's got the power to change someone's world, to change your world, to change the world. And that's what makes it quite unique, because it isn't just sport. And there's so much more to it and I think it's the Paralympic coverage is significant in that there hasn't always been the exposure that there is now. And like during Paris, 4.1 billion people watched the coverage. So if you think about the brand exposure that gives you, even if you aren't visible during games time, now we're not living in a world where the Paralympics only like it's 2 weeks and everybody gets involved and then nobody talks about it for 4 years. That's the key, is every 4 years we're building and building. And so since 2012, massive things have happened. And I think I'm just going to make sure that I don't miss any of the important bits, okay? So, but like ultimately, we're creating a level playing field for disabled people in elite sport when it comes to the Paralympics. But the question for today, there is a proper question, but my question of how I've ended up in this world is, why does that not translate into society? Like, why is it that we embrace it in the sporting environment, finally, after all this time, but then you come back from the Paralympics and the world just continues as if it doesn't even see disabled people? Because how many of you in this room have been to the Olympics? How many of you have competed in the Olympics? Anyone? So I don't need to continue the next. Youth Olympics? Yeah, we'll go with that. It's not bad. Yeah, we'll go with that. Yeah. We don't have a Youth Paralympics, so I don't have the stats to compare. So there's no equity there yet. But yeah, okay. So we got one. But then, so I don't need to go to my next question of how many of you have won an Olympic medal and how many of you won an Olympic gold medal, which is what happens after the Paralympics. If somebody meets a disabled person, they say, "Have you been to the Paralympics?" And like, okay, you might have, but the 1% of the population go to the Paralympics and the Olympics, right? So the chances are they haven't. And then how does that make somebody feel? Like, does that mean that their skills are not valued? And absolutely not, which is why today with the panel you're going to hear how many other ways there are to embrace this world and what you can gain out of the partnerships. Because ultimately, like I said, it's about way more than sport. Sport does have the power to change the world, but the Paralympics does so much more because it has the opportunity to shift perceptions and change assumptions and actually impact social mobility. Because if you think about the jobs it provides, the jobs it creates, and actually just it is the personification of what we want the world to be. And a part of our role as an ally is to take the lessons that we gain from being involved in parasport, however you're involved, and champion that in the real world. Because a lot more people have to survive in the real world than at the Paralympics. So ultimately, that is what today is about. And like I said, there is a question, and it's this question. And it's, how can brands work with disabled people? That's the key, to create representation that drives meaningful change. And actually, just quickly back to that Paris project, that was the difference. That's been, and we're going to hear a lot about Channel 4's relationship with the Paralympics and the coverage since London 2012. But the difference is that people started to be included rather than just considered. And so that is the question. How can brands work with disabled people to create representation that drives meaningful change? So we will meet our excellent panel, and then you won't have to listen to me. Oh, that's me again. You have to listen to me. No, you don't have to listen to me anymore, other than to ask a few questions. But first up, I think they've done it so that you can sit in a specific seat, is Kate Clayton. So what we'll do, she's head of corporate sport at Channel 4. What we'll do is we'll bring everyone up, then they'll tell you 2 minutes about themselves, and then we'll crack on. Is that okay for everybody? Is that okay for you? Come on up, Kate. She's brilliant. I think I think this was Dom's seat, so yeah, I'll go here. Excelente. Then, keeping it current, keeping it modern, we need the perspective. Sarah Burrows. She is a Wheelchair Rugby 5 player. And and then Ophelia's already bounced up, so she's already here. Excelente. Okay, so Sarah, thank you so much. I know it's pretty daunting, but when we met, you were like so animated on the panel. So I know that you're going to ask some really good questions. And I think your perspective is quite unique, right? Because we've all been in this game a long time. So for you, and I am going to talk about how young you are, because you're young in terms of like the audience. You're the audience that we want to impact. What do you wish, as a young disabled person, brands and media organisations better understood about your generation's experiences and expectations rather than just what they think you need?
Well, my first thing, don't make it look like we want people's pity. We don't need our sob story broadcasted everywhere. We've lived it, we know what that feels like. The world doesn't necessarily need to know all of it. We can be inspirational without talking about our disability, because it's how we are as people and who we are and what we do that make us special. It's not, oh, she's special because she's got a disability and she goes out and does all this stuff anyway. You're a great athlete, you'd be a great athlete whether you were disabled or not, in my opinion. So it's how that comes across. My granddad's the worst for it, so I had a life pre-disability. I was a dancer and a cheerleader. And then halfway through my degree, obviously everything was discovered and I had to get surgery, and I was doing a dance degree, so it wasn't the best time. And my granddad used to come in and he'd go, oh, it's a sin, you had such a good life. And I was like, I still have a good life. My life hasn't gone. It's just changed. And I think that good life that he thought I had wasn't as great as he thought it was. And it sounds really odd, but my life with my disability has actually been a lot better. And that, to be fair, that's down to the sport. I wouldn't have been speaking in front of people if I hadn't been playing. So that's my big thing. Don't treat us like some sad cases. We're just people. We all have different stories. Everyone has a story. Everyone goes through diversity, adversity, it's just how we handle it that makes us different, I think.
I think it's an excellent point. And I think you also draw attention to the fact it's quite generational. And that goes back to that idea of exposure. So if you think about your granddad, when they were his exposure or his understanding of disabled people would have been that they don't get opportunity and they don't get to do things, and so their life wouldn't be as good. But to your point, because of the challenges you've had, it's actually created a lot of opportunities. And that's the thing that goes back to that. If you're bringing someone into your team, whether it's as an employee or as an ambassador or as a consultant or whatever it is, they're going to have a different viewpoint because they've got different perspective. And actually, ultimately, I think I'm fortunate, like we said, in that, like you said, I was a good athlete. I'm not anymore, definitely. I can just about manage to swim these days. But luckily, through progression and opportunity, I've ended up working in an environment that actually, my sport has very little to do with my day-to-day life now, other than, like the point I made earlier, the Paralympic medal got me in the door. It gave me a chance for people to listen to me. But I think what brands really don't understand is like the youth of today, they've got attitude, right? And they've got reference point, and they've got access to information. That means they're not going to settle. So if you're a brand or you're a potential opportunity, if they don't think that they're being treated fairly, is this fair? If you don't feel like you're being treated fairly, then you'll just walk away. Yeah, exactly. So there was the nod of the head. That was a yes, everybody. She will walk away. And actually, that's the point. And I think when Dom was coming, we would have discussed this idea of the purple pound and the fact that actually the spending power of disabled people and their families currently in the UK, £274 billion, right? And actually, so as a brand, what can you do to get some of that, to get your share of that? And actually, if you've got people like Sarah helping you and advising you on what is required and what they're looking for, then you're more likely to capture that market share. So you are the future. But also, like you said, there is more exposure, and maybe people like your granddad didn't have as much access. But now we've got social media, we've got TV, we've got campaigns. People put money into campaigns. So have there been any positive or negative campaigns that have made you feel seen or massively dismayed as a disabled person?
One I've seen recently, Apple did a big accessibility campaign about six months ago called Remarkable, and it's a bunch of uni students with disabilities in the advert, and it's basically a song, so it's right up my street, to be fair. But the whole song's about they're not inspirational just because they've gone to university with a disability. That's no different to anyone going to university. They've just gone to university. And it's all about, they don't want to be known as an inspiration. They don't want to be known as remarkable just for doing average tasks. They just want to be seen for who they are. And yeah, they might study and be a nurse. That's remarkable because I could not do that. but it's not remarkable because they've done it on top of having a disability. It's their actual choice to go and do something. So that one stuck with me because it was like, oh yeah, I don't want to be remarkable for getting up and going to work every day and putting my shoes on and getting out of the house, because that's just weird. I don't praise my mum for putting her shoes on in the morning. So yeah, it's ones like that stuck to me. And again, I've had this plan before I knew you'd worked on it, to be fair. The Paris campaign for the Paralympics, because my first Paralympics that I seen was ironically when we won gold, because I was recovering from surgery, so I wasn't out of the house or anything like that. Now I take them off work. I take annual leave to watch them. But that campaign, the I Can thing, and it crossed all the words out, and I think the big one that Rugby shared had Fair West in it, and it was just very powerful because I was quite new to my disability still then. It still didn't sit right with me that I had a very different life. I found it really hard. I've still not been to a theatre to watch a show. We will get there. But that I was like, I can take my power back, I can play a sport, and I'd been on and off at wheelchair rugby at that point because I'd had more surgeries in between, ironically. And then I went back to rugby after recovering that season, and I went in with a completely different mindset. I was like, do you know what, in these chairs, we're all equal. I can hit you as hard as you hit me. It don't matter.
I think that is such a strong thing. That right there is the importance, is actually the world is full of different people, right? And actually we come at it from a disability angle today, but the point of inclusion is everybody has their own challenges, right? Whether they are recognised, whether they are protected characteristics or not. We all have, none of us are the same. If we look around the room, you can see some differences, but also everybody's come from a different house this morning, everybody's had a different morning routine. And so Sarah's point right there is the why. The why is so that someone else sees themselves doing something and realises that they can do it too. And I think, like you said, Channel 4 have been maybe taking a few more risks with some of the adverts, which is where Kate comes in. So, because obviously when London 2012 was awarded to Britain, obviously then there was a whole tender process, and Channel 4 were very deliberate about their approach to securing Paralympic Games coverage. So I guess, what prompted that as a commitment from the channel?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, I mean, you kind of did my job for me earlier, Liz, actually, but prior to 2012, in 2008 for the Beijing Paralympics, there was a 45-minute highlight programme. That was it. That was the coverage of the Paralympic Games. And in the UK, we knew that there would be a real opportunity for it being a home games, and we believed that it could really capture the public's imagination, that they wanted to come, they wanted to attend, and they wanted to watch a home games. Now, in terms of why Channel 4 wanted to broadcast the games, firstly, we felt that it really worked incredibly well with our remit. Our remit is to champion inclusivity, to do something different, and to challenge and change public opinions. And we felt that the Paralympics was absolutely perfect in terms of something that we could really get behind and really make a difference. We felt that we could make it as big as the Olympics, and we felt that there was a real opportunity to place disability front and centre of everything that we did. So not, again, we're kind of talking about it here, but not just show athletes and broadcast athletes, but have athletes as part of the coverage, part of the conversation. And so when we were looking at our approach to the games, having athletes as presenters was the very first thing that we wanted to do. And I love some of the anecdotes that the IPC give, that during the London 2012 Paralympic Games, they would walk into the IBC. The IBC is where all of the broadcasters are based. It's where they kind of do a lot of their production from. Channel 4 was the only broadcaster at that time that had disabled people as part of their presenting lineup. Fast forward to Tokyo and to Paris, and virtually every single broadcaster that was at those games, you'd walk into the IBC there, and they were working with people with disabilities, as part of their presenting lineup. So we like to think that we've kind of changed the dial there. But again, why should it be changed in the first place? It should be very natural that if you're talking, you wouldn't have the World Cup going on without having, footballers as part of your presenting lineup. So of course you want to have disabled people as part of your presenting lineup. So no, we felt it was a huge opportunity, and we're very proud to be the Paralympic broadcaster. I've actually been around Paralympic sport not quite as long as you, but I worked out since 2004, so 22 years. And I've seen an awful lot of changes myself in that time. There was a time that disability, and backstories was exactly what we were talking about at that time, whether it was in PR, whether it was in media, whether it was in broadcast, it was all about the backstories. And then sport came second, and there's been so much change since that, particularly you look at Paris, it's about athlete performance. Backstories still play a part, as it would do in the Olympics as well, but it's not the be-all and end-all that it was once upon a time. And there's been so much progress and so much change, and I think that's been incredible.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right in that, full context, sometimes people do want to know how that person has ended up at the Paralympics or what that means. Because back to Sarah sitting in her recovery, some people need to hear that to give them hope and to give them a path. So you're absolutely right. But I think, and like you said, it makes sense that you have para-athletes talking about para-sport, right? But it still needed people who were passionate in that early... And then in the beginning, the nucleus of people that you were working with all had that passion and all had that drive. And it was a safe enough bet when you were trying to convince people to get on board that as a para-swimmer, I knew about para-swimming, right? Like that, they could add to that. But then how did you take it to that next level? How did you ensure that people who were disabled and their voices were used to shape the content and the features and the how and the why and how much of those backstories came in and when? Because I think that was the challenge, maybe.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, in terms of the backstories, I think even in 2012, we were doing quite a lot around backstories. I think it's really progressed since. But I think the first thing we did is that we created opportunity. If you look back at 2012, we had sort of talent ID days, and we were kind of advertising that we wanted to have disabled talent come on board and have the opportunity to present. And I think it's opportunity in the first instance. You kind of fast forward to future games, and we decided that it wasn't enough just to be, sort of looking at on screen. What about behind the scenes? Production, TV production is a huge industry. TV and film, it's a huge, huge industry. But if you haven't had the opportunity, or even know how to get involved, then then you've kind of hit the hurdle at the very first start. So we wanted to create opportunity so that people were able to kind of come and train with us. So we would do an awful lot of training at the beginning, and we work with incredible producers. Whisper, of course, being one of them, and we're encouraging the production companies that we're working with, to be working with disabled talent as well. And I know that you've been involved since Paris, since Tokyo, I believe that you were involved in as well.
Yes, so I think I moaned too much in Tokyo because we had all that time because we did the pandemic games, and I spent a lot of time in the production office that I wouldn't typically do so we had different conversations, and it goes back to exactly that, that exposure, that chat, because like you said, people just sometimes don't understand what people are looking for.
Yeah, definitely. And if we've just had a Winter Games out in Cortina, 100% of our talent was disabled. But they're not only working in Paralympics as well, again, to your point of what's it that we can be doing outside of just that Paralympic Games. There are a number of our presenters and our production talent as well that are working across so many different genres at Channel 4. And I think that, another couple of cases in point would be The Last Leg. Hopefully everybody's managed to see an episode of The Last Leg and kind of chuckled along to it at some point. But, we took the decision to work with disabled comedians. And when they were looking at the tone of that programme all the way back to 2012, I remember that, I actually wasn't at Channel 4 at that time, but, kind of the stories, the stories that are told that, when we kind of spoke to the IPC and said, so we're going to put on a comedic show, and it's going to be looking back at the day's events. There'll be kind of a sports news element, but really we're going to be laughing with, with Paralympians and, sort of laughing with disability. And there were kind of a few people that kind of, sat up straight and said, oh, no, I don't know about that. But it was a huge, huge success. And just kind of making disability, sort of normalised and relevant. And, I kind of, hear you and Manny and our kind of call last week and kind of ribbing each other all the time. And, it's a show that has been hugely successful. And we've also encouraged our advertisers as well. So I think that a case in point there is that in 2016, for the Rio Games, we offered £1 million of free advertising to brands. You know, they could apply for it, brands that were looking at disability and including disability within their advertising, and working with disabled people to make a difference and to challenge public perception. And, you know, we ended up awarding that to Maltesers, and, you know, they had a brilliant campaign that went out during Rio. And I think that that's another way that we can really encourage different industries and how it is that they're kind of working with disabled people.
Yeah, and I think you made an excellent point that is a learning point for organisations in a wider sense. Is back when Channel 4 did take the gamble and the International Broadcasting Centre, there were disabled people in there because you'd employed them. But actually, and even though the Paralympic Games is super accessible, the broadcasting areas weren't always, because they'd never needed to be. And sometimes you respond to demand, right? And actually, even, like, I worked on my first Commonwealth Games way post being in broadcasting, because it's an integrated experience. But I couldn't get to the food truck because the food truck was like, I loads of really steep steps and then a railing. But once I had my food, I couldn't get down the railing. And so your point is, and Channel 4 are brilliant at that, like sharing those examples. And I think that's what you can gain from being part of this network, is as a partner with GB Wheelchair Rugby, is that you'll have access to everybody and all of the lessons that get learned, and you can all save each other's time. So I think the final thing for you at the moment would be, it's like you said, it's one thing making it happen in your environment that you're comfortable with, that you understand, that you have access to people that you know are going to be the right kind of ally or the right kind of ambassador. But how do you create an environment where the narrative of disability becomes an integral part of culture and society? So back to Sarah's point, those adverts, those trailers that you produce now, they would have been too bold for 2012, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing to say is that we always want to learn at Channel 4. We are always, you know, we're always doing research. We're always talking to people. We're talking to people within the disabled community. We're talking to sports and governing bodies. And what is it that we can be doing? And how it, you know, how is it that people are actually feeling about it? I'm actually going to show, if it's okay, the London 2012 Paralympic ad campaign, talk about it for a minute, and then going to show you the Paris one, just to kind of show you a few differences. And I think that, you know, before we produced this campaign, we spoke to athletes, you know, we spoke to sports, but it was very much to identify athletes, you know, who are going to be those exciting talent. And that was kind of the starting point. So we'll play, this was called Meet the Superhumans.
The Paralympics Games opening ceremony starts Wednesday at 8 on 4.
Lovely to see Steve Brown representing the sport there as well. So it's quite an emotive film, that, and it certainly introduces you to athletes, it introduces you to different sports and various disciplines. At the time, we created this, you know, the strapline Superhumans, which did very well during 2012, but we found, and again, you kind of pointed it a little bit to it earlier, Liz, that post-2012, amongst different communities, it was a term that really did cause a few issues and a few challenges, because people would be saying, well, just because I'm not a Paralympian doesn't mean that, you know, I'm not important. And using that term superhumans actually, you know, kind of didn't really shine disability in the best light. So we listened to a lot of research. We continued working with that term superhumans through to Rio 2016, but I'm not going to show the Rio ad, otherwise we'll be here all day if we showed all of them. But the Rio ad didn't just include athletes; it also included people from everyday society and everyday kind of walks of life, and looked at how disability was sort of part of their everyday life. So we felt as though we'd kind of just started changing the dial there. Then we went through to Tokyo 2020, and the campaign was super.human. So you kind of smashed out the super at the end, and it was kind of looking at the human part of an athlete. The fact that, you've got to get up at, what did you say, 5 o'clock in the morning? Half four in the morning. You get up at 4:30 and you have to slam your alarm down. You've got to get, a shed load of food in you, the training and every single part of your life kind of being controlled by your coaches and by your performance and everything like that. And it was looking at what is it that makes you human, and why is it that you want to be crazy enough to go and kind of put your body through this and compete at the very highest level. So that was Tokyo, and we felt as though we'd started to change the dial there again, and kind of public opinion at the back of it and insights and research showed that we were doing that job, but we felt that we needed to go further. So I'm going to show you the Paris campaign now, and the thing to point out about the Paris campaign is that we decided to turn the lens and focus on the audience, and what is it that the audience are doing, and what is it that the audience's reactions to athletes and to disability, what is it that is doing, what is it achieving, what is it not achieving, and we're kind of turning the lens and kind of pointing fingers but trying to do it in a bit of a Channel 4 way, really.
That biscotti is delicious. I love the crunch. The texture's spot on.
Really?
Gravity is totally self-centered. He wants to introduce your face to the floor, no matter who you are or what you look like. It breaks bones, hearts, and gives middle-aged men moves. Friction doesn't care. It's not here to make exceptions. You're going its way whether your lycra likes it or not.
Is that supposed to happen, that bit?
No.
All the screens have gone
That's
off
okay.
as well.
I can send that round if anybody would like afterwards. It carries on, and what it does at the end is that you kind of then get people who would be sat at home watching the TV, and they kind of go, that's amazing for someone in a wheelchair, and didn't he do well, in a really patronising well. And then kind of the key line just before the end is you've got two people kind of sat in a bus stop, and one's watching on the phone because people consume their media on their tablets obviously nowadays, and one says to the other, that really is amazing considering. And the guy sat next to her says, considering what? And I think that is the really, really key point. And we got to that point because we were looking at how we worked with people. And as you said, it's a shame that Dom isn't here, because we did a lot of work with Dom and the company that Dom's at called Purple Goat, really looking at how we can make differences. We work with athletes, we work with talents, we work with our presenters, and we're working with a number of different communities all the time to kind of challenge ourselves. We've got the challenge now, hopefully we'll get the rights, but what do we do for LA? How do we continue that conversation? But it's a challenge that we'll embrace. And I kind of love this point 2 years out, where our marketing teams kind of do all their insights work, and they sit there with their blank sheets of paper and say, right, come on then, how are we approaching this? And the first thing they will do when they say, how are we approaching this, is that they will talk to people, and they will make sure that they are working with the disabled community to make sure that that what we are producing is really relevant at the end of the day, and it is changing and challenging perceptions.
Yeah, and I think the point there is, like you said, the relevance of it, and it's really important to respect where people are. I hate the word journey, but like everybody's in a different point in terms of their exposure, back to Sarah's granddad. And I think, like you said, if you'd put the Paris advert on TV at London, people would have just turned off, because
all you see is moves.
Well, and they wouldn't have, but they also wouldn't have understood it, and they wouldn't have been engaged enough in the cause to want to sit and listen to because we've all got very short attention spans nowadays, right? So, but actually, so with the Superhumans campaign, whilst it didn't necessarily please everybody, what it did do is, because of Channel 4's commitment with 150 hours, it provided an opportunity for context. So then actually, if people didn't get it in the moment, the hope is that then it got explained throughout and people understood, and you did connect with the audience that you're trying to impact. And I think in terms of, for brands, that's always been difficult, because before the Paralympics was on the TV, there was no exposure. So, and ultimately, it's a business case, right? Like back in the day, sports partnership and sponsorship was all about visibility. There's a reason why the Premier League has got so much money, right? And actually, so it's unrealistic. And I used to say that all the time, like in swimming, there's not that much opportunity for visibility. We don't wear many clothes, right? And so, and actually when we're competing, we're in the water, you have no visibility. So it's a challenge for the historic way that things were done, for brands to see where they could benefit other than just paying money to have their name on a piece of kit.
I was going to make just a point on swimming there. So again, going back to before 2012, when swimming was broadcast, the TV cameras would cut just as the race started, because they didn't want to be showing athletes with their disabilities, because when you are wearing swimsuits and you see a lot of the body, they didn't want to be showing swimmers before they got in the water. And we spoke to swimmers who said, that is absolutely ridiculous. This is me. I am proud of me, and it is part of the race. The getting on the block, getting in the water, however that happens, that is part of it. So that was kind of another key change that I think has been brilliant, for the sport.
Yeah, again, it's exposure, isn't it? And I think again we've heard from the audience, like the people we're trying to impact in Sarah, in that people are trying to connect with it, and like from Kate, who's lived parasport, lived the world of disability, lived, like, you're comfortable with taking those risks and taking those challenges. But actually, like from your point of view, like it's a risk, isn't it? Like there's always as a brand, you've got so many other things to consider, because you might not have the opportunity to provide 150 hours worth of context on one marketing line that you've produced. And so, like, it's brilliant to see that you are one of the partners 28, because, and like, it would be great to hear, I guess, like what you've learned and from it, and like how exactly people can benefit and organizations can benefit from creating that inclusive and authentic representation. Because I think the challenge again with London 2012 was, it was the first opportunity, right? So all of the athletes had very visible disabilities, because you've got a 60-second campaign to get people's attention. So there was a lack of understanding that 80% of disabled people have a hidden impairment. Or if people, even if wheelchair users are sat in a standard office chair or on a sofa, you might not even know that they have no use of their legs, right? So it's complicated, and it's difficult. So as a brand, you're challenging everything, aren't you? So yeah, ultimately, I guess, how do you go about creating a more inclusive and authentic representation in a practical sense?
Thank you very much. I'm going to pick on Manny, because I remember we were working on a particular piece earlier this year, and we'd framed it and we were really excited. Yes, we've got the US team to agree on something. And then I said, Manny, what do you think? And he's like, have you seen the words that are there? And I was like, what do you mean? Because I'm looking at it through my lens. And Manny was like, well, it's a little bit ableist. He didn't say it in those words, but it was, because we were speaking about stepping into spaces. Really simple, isn't it? But that's something that you might overlook. And that for me was a learning experience, because it's about thinking about that process. Are you involving people with disabilities to vet it, or are they involved throughout the process? Who's in the room at the point of ideation when you're conceptualizing? How are you determining what success looks like? Is it through your lens? And finally, when you're shaping the narrative, who's helping to shape the narrative? Because the reality is, I'm a marketing and comms professional, and I work with a lot of experts, but they're insurance professionals. Really and truly, we need to start looking at lived experience as expertise. I don't know what it is like to live your life, and you probably don't know what it is like to live mine, and it's going to be distinctly different. but lived experience is expertise. And that's something that I've learned. And I have to make notes because my mind is a little bit. One of the other things that we've learned is that at the end of the day, when you're telling stories, it's not about telling stories about people, because it's not my story to tell. So how do you ensure that the right people are shaping the narrative? So I always challenge myself, if you're going back in those sessions where you're having the marketing meetings, and you close your eyes, kind of literally and figuratively, and you look around the room, who are the people in those rooms? Really and truly. Are they people who think exactly like you? You know, because it means that the story is through your lens. It doesn't reflect the constituents that you serve. It doesn't reflect your people. It doesn't reflect your customers. It doesn't reflect the people that you're trying to serve or to appeal to. So it's really something that we need to challenge ourselves with.
Yeah, I think you highlight an excellent point, is that so often process gets in the way, because you, like you said, you do what you know. And if you're up against it, you try for the quick, like what's going to be quickest and most cost effective. And sometimes people don't take that time and that opportunity to step back and ask, like you said, ask the right questions or ask the right people. And I think that point you make about lived experience being an expertise is huge, because actually if you think about any recruitment process or any job application, and it doesn't just affect disabled people, but it'll be like, have you got any experience? What's your experience, like previous experience? And like most people are applying for a job that's higher than the one they've ever done before, right? So the chances are they haven't got any experience that's going to relate to that. So your point around how do we encompass that lived experience and put a value on it is really difficult, and you can only do that if the people are in the room. So I guess it's difficult. As a global organization, the challenge is that every region approaches every difference differently, right? And if you, like, even to your point about language, like there's different terminology in different areas of the world, and some are more evolved than others. And like, especially when it comes to disability, like some people don't agree with some terms that are used. Like even in Britain, when we lead with disabled people, but the majority of the world like call us people with disabilities. And so even then, you could potentially upset or offend somebody through no fault of your own, right? Again, back to exposure. So I guess for you at the Hartford, like how is it that sort of the approach specifically to disability inclusion, how does it work? And ultimately, like you said, you've been on process is a way better word than journey, by the way. So like, what has the process been? Because we heard from Kate around how even in an area of comfort in terms of Paralympic sport, because you're never going to be much more comfortable with exposure to disability than you are at the Paralympics, right? Or working with the Paralympics. But it was a process to get from 2012 to 2028, and there's still challenges coming up. So how receptive have your audiences been to the changes in these processes?
So it's interesting that you're speaking about how receptive our audiences are, because the Hartford has actually been a part of the adaptive sports movement for over 30 years. So in the US, our team, they're partners with an organization called Move United. And we, of course, have this awesome partnership with GBWR, where we sponsor the Women and Girls Talent Program. And that's our opportunity to learn and to, more importantly, listen. When you think about communicating to audience, the first part, and you touched on it, is that listening piece. So for us, that's the bit. It's not about it being a tick box exercise, right? It's about actually having that collaborative process where you're really embedded with the brand. And then you speak about the games. Everybody wants to be a part of the games. Who doesn't want their logo emblazoned across the jerseys to say, yes, sometimes it's a little bit of tokenism, really, unfortunately, or virtue signaling. Look at us, we're so brilliant. But audiences are very smart. They look at what you do not once per year, or, you know, at certain dates. It's Pride Month, yay. It's a Black History Month, woohoo. And look, it's, you know, we're looking at this date that celebrates people with disabilities. They're looking at what you're doing all year round. So for us, it's not about those one-off moments, and that's the importance of the games. What are you doing before? What are you doing during? And then when the lights fade, what are you doing after? So I think that's the challenge that that's how we have to challenge ourselves, because that's the reality, right? You don't live with disabilities like one day out of the year or for the games. It's your reality. So that's it really for us. And then in terms of how audiences experiences, if you think of brand, if I came here and said, I'm a very quiet and retiring person, I don't say much, I'm just, I'm very shy. And then outside you see me doing a Jamaican dance and shouting and having fun, you'd be like, well, it's not connecting. And it's the same with brands. Your audience is looking at everything you do, not that one thing that you do. So for us at the Hartford, what we'll hear not only from our audiences, but from our people who want to work for us, is that actually we love your culture. We love what you stand for. And that's how you attract and retain customers. And that's how you attract and retain talent. And more incredibly, that's how you build trust and credibility.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to what Sarah was saying, is that like you have choice, like people have choice, and actually if it's not authentic, people are going to leave. So like that concept of not just being around for the 2 weeks of the Paralympics to get your name in lights, there's no substance to that anymore. Yeah. And people will walk away, people won't engage, you won't get the benefit of partnering because people won't support you. Mm-hmm. So I guess, and you've alluded to the fact that it is the before, the during, the after, the legacy piece that people talk about that can really make the change, that really impacts social mobility. So now that you know that, because obviously, I mean, the World Cup goes first and the Paralympics follow. It happened with Rio, it's going to happen with LA, but it's going to be a challenge, right? And actually, soccer wasn't a big sport in America for a long time. And similarly, the Paralympics probably does also lag behind in terms of people's understanding and exposure. So it's going to be a challenge to get people to engage and embrace. But from what you've learned on your journey so far, and like you said, and I think it's so important that it is about that whole piece, not just the Paralympics themselves, what roles do you think organisations need to take on in the bigger sense?
I think it has to be continuous, and it has to be a part of the fabric of who you are. So if you think about comms 101, right? If you're sharing a message and you share it once, hi, I'm Ophelia. So you'll be like, okay, she's Ophelia, it disappears. But if every time I have this conversation and I'm speaking, as somebody who's, my name's Ophelia and I'm Jamaican, and yes, because when I'm in Jamaica, and yes, as somebody whose name is Ophelia and it means this, but then I'm also Jamaican, because it's reinforced that you're saying it over and over again. And I'm sure you're going to remember my name after this, right? Because that's the point. Repetition matters, it counts. But it's not just doing it in a way that's tokenistic. It's actually making it a part of you so that you don't even, after a while, it doesn't become deliberate. You don't think, oh, do I need to have this person represented here? It's almost automatic. You're checking yourself and you're saying, okay, something's missing. There's a point of view missing. So it's that repetition, and it's just making it a part of who you are, not what you say. And sometimes it just begins with practicing doing that, and it becomes natural. So,
Yeah, I think that meaningfulness is the key. I mean, if you think about when you're a child, if someone asks you to do something, if you don't know why you're doing it, you don't see the point. Like, you don't really engage unless you're forced. And actually, where's the benefit in that? Because as adults, there's enough of everything to go around, right? There's enough skills to go around, there's enough opportunity to go around, that if we create the equitable environment, then the right people will do what is meaningful to them, whether that's meaningful employment, whether that's meaningful socializing, whether that's meaningful activity, right? Which is why it's brilliant that there's so many different ways to get involved in para sport. And I think, so to you, you're absolutely right. And I think the Paralympics does shine a meaningful light on disability every 2 to 4 years. We say 4 years because we tend to be talking about the summer games, but you do get that insight into the winter games as well. And again, it's a whole different world, and there's a lot of different adaptations and challenges and amazing things that happen. And again, not because people are disabled and it's inspiring, because it's actually genuinely quite inspiring. So I guess, but it can't be only every 4 years, right? And so how often between Paralympics, how often do you see disability and people who are disabled on panels or on TV shows or in adverts when it isn't linked to a chat about the Paralympics?
Not often at all, and normally if they are there for that tick box. Like you'll see a brand advert and there'll be, oh, there's a guy in the wheelchair at the side there, but he's not actually part of the main story, which he may as well not be there. There's no point. Or you see an able-bodied playing a disabled person role as well in adverts outside of the Paralympics and on TV, which shouldn't happen. There's enough disabled people around to actually get their insight and their opinion rather than have able-bodied people do it. My biggest example of that, show my age here now probably. Anyone watched Glee?
Glee, yes.
The guy in the wheelchair, he's the main character. He's not a wheelchair user. He's not. And there's enough wheelchair users that have talent, that have them skills that they could use. So while they try and do the best to include disabled people outside of disability sport, putting an able-bodied person in a wheelchair is not a way to get around it. Speak to actual disabled people. I use a wheelchair 50% of the time. I walk 50% of the time. That doesn't make me any less disabled than someone in a wheelchair full-time either.
Yeah, yes.
That's so interesting because I love Glee, but it also takes I really do. I'll probably start dancing and singing in a second. But it also takes that opportunity away from somebody who could, as you point out, you're disabled, but you can also sing and dance. So why would you not give that opportunity to somebody who could give a more authentic representation of whatever you want that character to embody? You know, so thank you for bringing that to light because I never thought of it, which just shows how much you take for granted sometimes as well.
I think, again, it's that authenticity piece. And it's risk, right? People think it's risky because, again, I feel sorry for your granddad because he's not here to defend himself, but he probably wouldn't. He probably wouldn't anyway. But the point is that, again, he wouldn't ever think that a person who uses a wheelchair or a disabled person would have had the opportunity to develop those skills because in his era, they weren't integrated into society at any level, really. You went to a different school even out of your county, you know, and that's what people represent. So it is that authenticity piece. And I think, like from your point of view, Kate, what do you think needs to happen? Because again, the challenges are putting Paralympic sport on TV. If you've got the contract, it's going to happen. Yeah. If you're going to use para-athletes as your pundits or your presenters, then you're going to move it into the production team. But again, how many times have you had conversations where it's like, oh yeah, disabled people work on the Paralympics, and then they go off, and then 4 years later you call them up and they come back. Yeah. So what can we do in the interim to make that change?
I mean, I think there needs to be more. There does need to be. I think that, and this isn't a bigging up Channel 4 thing, but I think that we are further ahead than other broadcasters, but there's still a lot of work to be done. You know, I was thrilled that we broadcast the boat race for the first time this year. And, you know, Claire Balding pops up, as she does with, you know, a lot of things, but she is a bit of a legend around sports broadcasting. And then we had Adia Depatin, we had Pete Reed, who is a former Olympic rower who has been a wheelchair user since he had a stroke a few years ago. And we had Lauren Rouse, who is a para rower. And they were presenters, part of our coverage the whole day long. And then we had Jamie Lang from Made in Chelsea up there, you know, so a really mixed kind of lineup. But we didn't even think twice when we're looking at our lineup. We weren't working with, you know, Addie's just a massive sports fan, but we weren't working with Pete and Lauren because they were disabled. We were working with them because they're rowing experts. Pete is a former Olympian, and Lauren is a Paralympic gold medalist, and we're working with them because they are rowers and because they know the sport, and we want to have authentic voices in the room. But there needs to be more of that. You know, it's one thing doing it across sport where we have a lot of control, but we need to be doing it across, you know, a lot of other genres as well. You know, I sit on a broadcast steering group where we're working with international broadcasters to try and, you know, work together to say how can we make Paralympics broadcasting better. But the conversation needs to evolve. That, you know, how are we doing that across all of our coverage and all of our genres. And you're right, a number of broadcasters will go, oh no, in that programme we did have somebody in a wheelchair, or we did have somebody who's visually impaired, or we did have somebody with a hidden disability. But the question is, but what role were they playing? And you know, what you know, when they're acting, you know, they've got brilliant acting. How central was their character? It needs to be that question to really kind of evolve it on now.
Yeah, I think that, and that's the authenticity piece again, isn't it? Is knowing that person's good. You're employing them for their skill set, and it's just another opportunity. And they're proven. You've used proven people, right? And actually, you can move them into, because the skills are transferable, and that's the key in employment too. Look for the transferable skills, because we've heard the word tokenism a lot, I guess, and the challenge is so much of our media content and the way that we access people's homes, and people generally is media. Now, whether that's a 30-second, a 5-second clip on TikTok, or like a 30-second ad or whatever it is. So how do we avoid that tokenistic approach? Because it's difficult, because like Ophelia, you made a really good point in that you'd never thought about the point from Glee, but I guess if it's us per se, then absolutely, again, people never really have discriminated against me because I'm female, right? Because they focus on the fact that I'm disabled, right? So then I, as an individual, have to take a step back and think about women's rights a bit more, because I'm championing for disabled rights, and I'm like, right, hang on a second, but how much is that individual missing out because they're female? And so how do we avoid that tokenism? Or combat it, probably. We're never going to avoid it.
Wow, that's a heavy question.
I know. We're all friends now, we can go deep.
But, for me, it is thinking about inclusivity. And again, I walk into a room all the time as a black woman, right? But I'm conscious that there are different people who have different things, that distinct characteristics that they're grappling with. For me, it's how do you create an inclusive society? Because if it's inclusive, then you don't need to worry about making it unique or special for any one trait. And what does inclusivity look like? I know I'm going to sound like a scratched record. It's going back to the people who are the decision makers. Do you have the right decision makers around the table? Because if you do, then you have different points of views, and the diversity of thoughts leads to you creating those spaces where you're not thinking about should the disabled character just be sitting over here, when we're doing that particular screenplay, or are they doing something more active? Because you're not looking at people in little boxes. You're looking at people, you're looking at the story that you want to tell, and you're thinking about how you want to tell it most authentically. So I guess my challenge to us is, are we creating inclusive spaces generally, or are we focusing on the thing that matters most to us? Because then that will shape whatever it is that you produce.
Can I add to that? Yeah. Oh, thank you. I have a thought. The other thing for me, if you're a brand and you're going to use a disabled person in an advert, you need to make sure that disabled person can access whatever it is you're advertising. That's very important. So if you're going to do a big brand launch and you've used this person with a disability in your advert, that brand launch needs to be somewhere accessible. If there's 2 steps to get in the door, the person that's advertising for you can't come. And as well, your price points. The second you put accessibility or adapted in front of something, it jumps up. Yes, some disabled people do work, some don't, whatever, but why are we paying more for average day-to-day things? So make sure it's accessible on all things. Not just, we've got a disabled person on the advert. It needs to be accessible for them to come, get whatever it is you're advertising, get to a launch event, and also actually buy the item, and they might want to keep it.
Yeah, and I think, Sarah, again, we said at the beginning, and I'll say it again, that's the attitude that you're trying to appeal to now. If someone can't get in the building, they're not going to buy your product. They're not going to taste your food. They're not going to, because why should they? Because they don't feel like they've been thought about. So why should they then line your pockets? So I think, the panel have been brilliant, and they've given so much insight, and they will answer many a question now and when you're sweeping up the last bit of breakfast. But I think what we've learned here is, and you alluded to it many a time, Kate, and we all know it, is that because if you're exposed to something, it becomes more comfortable, right? And if, in terms of accessibility, if there's a need, you respond. But I think when we are faced with difference, we have to accept that we don't know everything about everything, and that's okay. So part of existing in this world is being vulnerable enough to know that you don't have all the answers, and there might be someone out there with a lived experience that actually is a huge value add. So and sometimes you have the privilege of working naturally in that environment with those teams. So at the Paralympics or so in wheelchair rugby, sometimes you have to go outside of your comfort zone and explore new opportunities. But luckily, there's a range of people in this room. And so we are going to open to the floor in a second, but first we're coming to the floor. So, and again, obviously RGK, one of the big partners of life, I think, for a lot of disabled people, but again, have had to respond so much. And actually, there would have been a time where people would, like, designing wheelchairs had never used one in their life, right? So I'm going to come to you first, Mike, because I like this. You can all get involved, but I'm going to come to you. Ultimately, like, can you just talk us quickly through, I think, like the benefit? There was a cube mic as well. Where's that one gone? They're cool because you can lob them around the room. But
can you hear me?
In terms of like designing adaptive equipment, what has been the benefit of actually working, back to our original question, with disabled people, not just like people doing it for disabled people?
Yeah, well, going back to what you said at the start, I think what was interesting to me is 1% of people go to the Paralympics, and flipping that back, what I'm quite proud of as a brand and what we do, which is unique, is whether it's a tennis player, whether it's a basketball player, whether it's a rugby player, whether it's somebody that just wants a daily use product, we listen to the individual. Probably every consultation will take 20 or 30 minutes of just sitting and hearing what that individual wants to improve the product. So we spend a lot of time listening and just linking it to the GBWR partnership. And I haven't been paid to say this, by the way, but the partnership is really a true partnership where we have seen success as a brand. We've had a rugby chair in our portfolio for quite a number of years. We'd never really given it the focus to push it. What we've done, and what I'll take away from this experience, is we've had great support from GBWR, but we've also listened to the community, and we've actually evolved the existing product. And I think what's been really well received in the GBWR community with our chairs, and probably why we're selling more of them, is we are listening to what people want. We are very fortunate as a brand because every product we make is built to the millimetre. And one of our ethoses is trying not to say no, whether that's a colour scheme, whether that's a certain option. So yeah, unique in that respect. But yeah, anything else from you guys that you want to? Yeah.
They're happy to let you do the talking, I guess. Yeah. And like, again, not to put anyone on the spot, but like these challenges come up all of the time, and that's where the magic happens, right? When you're evolving and you come up against a barrier and you've got to find a way to solve it, and hopefully you've got some other people in your team that will get on board with you, but sometimes you've got to fight the fight alone and then prove them, and then people go, oh yeah, that was a good idea. So is there anyone in the room that's had an experience where they've had to adapt a process, or they've brought something in, or there's been a challenge that they haven't figured out yet? Go on, can you just pass the mic back?
Oh, here you go.
I missed the cube. There was definitely a cube. Oh, there it is.
So I actually was part of the digital team who worked with Channel 4 for Rio 2016 with Live Wire Sport. Hello. And, you know, it was the first time. We were a small agency and we went to the media day and we did all these fun challenges for social media. Video was new. Twitter, great copy. We had one challenge where they had to read a piece of paper. And I think the ability to also put your ego aside and be called out. And Steve Bate turned around and went, Hannah, I'm blind. I can't read that piece of paper. And we just, you know, and he allowed us to be called out. We learnt from it, and we made it work, and we still had a really great piece of content. But it's also not thinking that every single idea, every single piece will work in the same way for individuals, and then putting your ego aside and learning from it. And we were able to laugh about it, and I think that's also the great thing about some of these athletes is also that, you know, it's not an elephant in the room. We're all here. We're all just people. We're all just people with differences. And I think it was really interesting for my team, the agency itself, to say this is a really great idea for 75% of the Paralympic athletes. For those who do have a disability involving their sight, it's not. But how can we still pivot this idea to make it make sense? And there was, you know, and it was just like, it was a really collaborative feel. It was learning. And I think we're still on that learning journey, and it's actually really fun in the end. So yeah, it's, and I think you do find a real space for people to share. And, you know, and again, it comes back to the fact we didn't have the right people in the room for that idea. We didn't, you know, we had shaped it on the, we actually had one of the Channel 4 interns in our team, but she was a wheelchair user. So it hadn't been raised for her because sight wasn't an issue, you know, so really, I think, with my work with the BMC, who I'm on the board for, we talk about how you can't understand exclusion if you've never been excluded. You can't, it's really hard to walk in those shoes. The only way to understand that is to really engage with people who do have that lived experience. But you've got to find them, and you've got to hold your hand up and say, I'm an expert in this part of the room, but I'm not an expert in your part of the room, so please tell me. And so, yeah, so it was great fun. Loved the project. Love everything about this world, so yeah.
That's really helpful, thank you, because I think you've just linked back to the idea of like being okay to be vulnerable, and the vulnerability in that sense is that you don't have all the answers. But why would you? Because I think we say a lot in our working world, like you can't be expected to know something that you've never needed to know before. And if it was a different area that you were more comfortable, you would be like, I don't know that. Like if someone asked me to be a rugby pundit, I'd be like, well, I don't have the knowledge to be a colour pundit at rugby, right? Like I would just say it. So why is it that when we're faced with a difference that we're not comfortable with, we don't necessarily do that? I think you've made an excellent point.
And it's also that I was talking to these guys earlier, and I was saying, you know, for a lot of people, they have no experience of being in a chair. And I was saying some of us touch that experience. Like my first touching of it was when I became a mum. And if someone leaves a bin in the middle of a pavement, I can't get my pram around that. And that was my first very gentle knocking against accessibility and how it really, really is impactful. And, you know, I think so many people don't understand that because they've never been excluded in that way. And just changing your mentality there allows you to make really good, coherent, thought-out choices in how you deliver.
Yeah, like my favourite question is my friends will be like, how do you butter this with one hand? Like butter toast with one hand. Like once they've had a baby and they're holding a baby, they're like, how do you do everything with one hand? But if you don't, it's normalised. We used the word normalised here earlier, and exactly that. We're just normalising these differences so that we're not scared of them. And actually, it's okay. Like, human interaction doesn't need to change just because you're faced with someone who is not like you. So you've got these wonderful ladies for a little bit longer. So if anyone got any questions for them? There's a mic. No, I've got the cube now. I'm ready. No, I'm not. I bet no one will ever want me to play rugby if they see me throw this. Has anyone got any questions? Not a single. Go on. Oh, the cube. He's right there. Right, okay, there you go. The cube. Does it work? Is it on? Lovely, it's on. Is it? Okay, good.
You talk about getting comfortable with talking about these issues as well. In the Paris Paralympics, I think it was the TikTok account was very uncomfortable, but also really it was funny, and also with Channel 4 advertising, you also tackling the uncomfortable head on. How do those conversations go? Where trying to understand where the line is and what's too far?
Yeah, I mean that particular case.
Where's the mic gone now?
The IPC actually spoke to us. We have a very good working relationship, with the IPC, and
trying to constantly evolve together. And they spoke to us and said, we like what you've done on the last leg, and we would like to try and bring in a similar kind of satirical kind of comedy element to our TikTok account. So they wanted to try it and embrace it, and I actually think that there was quite a lot of success. But I'd love to hear what you think, Sarah. I don't know if you saw some of the content that was sort of put out on TikTok during the games, and if what your reactions were, as a disabled person, as an athlete, kind of watching some of that as well.
So one thing for me, I'm all up to date on the Paralympics, don't worry. I take time off work to be glued to the Paralympics. It's a bit bad for me mum, she don't get telly. No, I really like stuff like that. I love stuff that makes able-bodied people a bit uncomfortable in the seats, because that's kind of a glimpse on how we feel. Just walking around, we don't always feel comfortable in our skin because the world is not designed for us. So if our content goes out there and makes them think, oh, this ain't nice, maybe then they'll think, maybe when they're doing stuff, how can we make them feel a bit more included? How can we make them feel more comfortable? Yep. So it's fine by me.
I think that's a solid as well, because I think people see that discomfort as a bad thing. You're right. It's like, oh, this is uncomfortable. But actually, why? Ask yourself why it's uncomfortable. And again, is it because you suddenly realise that you've forgotten to invite somebody? Is it because you haven't made a provision for that person's heritage? Is it what is it? What is making you uncomfortable? And I think there is a line. And again, from region to region, that line is in a different place. And I think, but again, if you accept your vulnerability and you're aware of it, then ultimately what ends up happening is you make a mistake, right? Like it's a bit like, one super easy example is, you know when you're writing the date and it turns to January the 1st, and for the first week you write the old year, right? You're like 2025, 2025. But after a week or so of making that mistake, it's embedded in you, which is what you said, you learn to live it and you don't even have to think about it anymore, and it becomes a part of who you are. And it's just looking at as growth and empowerment as an individual and then ultimately as an organisation, and it helps your brand. So has anybody got any further questions before we leave you with some wonderful, ooh, yes. Do you want the mic? Yes, he's going to throw the cube.
It was just to touch on a point that Sarah made about if you work with disabled people, making sure that your product or your event is accessible to that person. It was just to say, I noticed that with a brand called Lucy and Yak, that they have disabled models in wheelchairs, but then not that long ago, there's a bit of uproar that some of their stores aren't accessible, there's steps to get into there and there's no way for people to get in. So it was just quite like eye-opening to see that sort of that community had picked up on that and noticed. But yeah, I think it's just important to I guess be vulnerable, as we've discussed, and know that, you know, I haven't been in kind of the industry that I'm in for all that long, really. I didn't really know much about it before I came into it, so allowing yourself to be vulnerable and not be defensive, but hear people's experiences and listen to them. Yeah, I think that's really important to then be able to grow. Like your point on the 2012 kind of campaign and the superhuman, to be able to take the feedback but then adapt and evolve the idea. I just think that's what's important in society in general. We should all just be listening and making a change. As long as somebody's making that effort to do it, I think, you know, people can see that they're making that effort, and that's what's important, isn't it?
Yeah, and a lot of people in the room are in agreement with you, and I think that is ultimately what these partnerships are about. It's like the empowerment, like it's constantly growing as people and learning how to step out of that comfort zone to make everybody's world a better place, whether that's from a business case or from a society place or just as an individual. And I think, like we've talked a lot, we've heard a lot, like ultimately it's about being good people. We do it in our everyday lives, and we just need to continue to extend it into our areas of discomfort, because ultimately this is what we want to know. How can we make a difference? And it goes back to this concept of building with disabled people, not for them. And like consultation is great to find out what people feel, right? And what they think. And actually, most of us, I'll put my hand up, I typically fill a survey in with more detail if I'm more disgruntled, right? Like when things are good, I might go, yeah, that was amazing, or I'll give you a 5 out of 5. But I'm likely, unless there was something absolutely mind-blowing, I'm not that likely to give you the detail of everything you did amazingly well, right? But the collaboration element is the how. It's the how you make the change. Because we saw very well, people will tell you what they feel every day. How many times have you sat on a panel when people, or a radio phone in, where all they've talked about is what's wrong? Like, there's very often not space to talk about the how to make it better, and that's where the collaboration element comes in. And like then we said, like the inclusion, it's a year-round commitment. It's a lifelong commitment. It's not a sort of a campaign moment. Don't get me wrong, to Ophelia's point, sometimes you have to take the opportunity when it's there. You have to get in the door, and sometimes in the door is £1 million worth of free advertising, right? But we're going to get on board with that, and then we're going to work out how it works. But ultimately, it's once you're in, you're in. And if you're not, leave it to somebody else. But don't be taking up space where things can happen and you're not the right person. And then ultimately, the biggest risk isn't getting it wrong. It's not involving disabled people at all. So to your point, like you will make mistakes. And again, society, we still use the wheelchair sign as a universal sign for disabled people, when only 8% of disabled people are wheelchair users. So it's not your fault that when you think of disability or hear the word disabled, you naturally think of a wheelchair or you naturally think of the Paralympics, because that's the exposure that you've had. But actually, ultimately, it's also understanding that we don't always have access to people who are not like us, right? Like, we don't. But this partnership, like 28 for 28, is a huge opportunity for you to almost have like a soft introduction to a very safe environment for people to help and guide and support you in developing and evolving in an area as a business and an organization. Like I said, to help with social mobility, to help with understanding, maybe to help you on your own personal journey, but at the same time, supporting and helping other people, ultimately the team, to go and absolutely smash it at 2028 and beyond. So it's a dual benefit, and I think that's ultimately what partnerships like this are about, and actually what the world is about. So thank you for your time. And Jason, do you want to say goodbye? He wants the cube. See, everyone wants the cube.
First of all, let's get a round of applause for hosting the panel.
Well done, team. Well done. Excellent work.
No, great job. Thanks, Liz. Thanks you all for taking the time out. And again, thank you all for coming out here. Again, I hope you've come away with something, some different thoughts, different considerations. That's what it's about. We posted some of the content on this online, and it'll be available. So again, big thank you for being part of this, or hopefully in the future going to be part of this kind of process. I won't use journey.
Process is way better than journey, isn't it?
But also the little things that everybody can do. See, we've got our socials there. Just like, follow, and share us. Like those kind of little things that everybody can do help spread that bit of awareness. Not just about us, but about disability. So there's still breakfast left. There's still drinks. Have some. We'll have a chat. And have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. What do you think they'll do? What do you think they'll do? That's always what blows my mind now. Cheers. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well done, team. No worries. What do you think they'll do? That's always my thing next. Is like, what will they do?